everyone, and welcome back to the Laura Show. I am with the Miss Pav Wander, award-winning teacher, mother, podcaster, and author. Thank you so much for being with me
Thank you
today.
so much for having me, Laura. This is such a great experience for me.
I mean, obviously it's timely because you're on summer vacation. So
Yes.
I got to steal some of your time. I know during the rest of the year you're a very, very, very busy woman. So I appreciate you taking the time to come here today. I actually think for my viewers and listeners, I need to kind of tell them the backstory, if you don't mind me kind of starting there.
Yeah.
In 2018, my business partner and I, we started a podcast. Well, he wasn't my business partner then, but I helped someone start a podcast in 2018. And in doing so, we were always kind of thinking like who would be some incredible guests to have on. And at that time, he was talking a lot about his upbringing in the educational system, growing up in Rexdale, and that was very, very important to him. And how important like having really good teachers that supported him, and he really felt like that fostered his success.
Right.
So in talking about teachers, we talked about the school that he used to go to.
Yeah.
And then in talking about that school that he used to go to, he said, I have a friend that I used to know back in the day, and she now teaches at that school.
I did at that. Well, I did in the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, not when we
connected.
spoke. Yeah.
Okay. And he said, she'd be so much fun to like collaborate with.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's something we can do there. So he reached out. And I mean, I want to say like the rest is history, but no one knows what the rest is. Essentially, what we decided to do was something that I still think goes back in my memory bank as one of the most special things that we've done, where we actually went to the school that you were working, to high school? Was that?
It's a middle school.
Middle
it's
school.
A junior. It's an elementary school.
Elementary.
K-8.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say they weren't high school kids.
No, they were grade 7 and
sweet.
8. Yeah.
7 and 8. And with those classes, we kind of helped each little team that we created really create a podcast episode of their own. Yeah. And they had to pick a topic that was important to them and essentially like be on camera, be recorded, and talk about something that was meaningful to them. And obviously 7 and 8, I mean, you think back to those days, like the insecurities that you have, your uncertainty, and they all came with such a good attitude and really wanting to like make the best of it. Obviously you can tell which kids, put like that extra effort in, but it was such a special experience to see these kids kind of come out of their shells. And I learned a lot from them with those topics. Like some of those topics were really deep.
They were really deep. And I have to say that was probably one of my signature moments as a teacher as well. It was just something that we'd never done before as teachers. Myself and Chey, who is my podcast partner now, we were teaching together at the time, and Jazz reached out to me and said, what do you think about doing something together? But he goes, I don't know what we could do. And I said, well.
He left to you to figure out.
As a good student would do. So I said, well, you've got a podcast and it's successful, and the kids would really benefit from exposure to a different form of content creation that maybe they've never had the experience of building.
Right, and you think back, like kids are used to like write an essay, write a story, journal, and stuff like that, but never is it like or it's drama class where they're pretending to be somebody else. But this was an opportunity for them to just like use their own words in topics that they found interesting.
And something that they were really into at the time, but like not that I recall, there was no real building of this kind of content in the school space at that time. At least I wasn't doing it, and I didn't really see anybody else doing it at the time. And so this was a really great opportunity for us to say, let's expose them to something new. You had a fantastic, very professional team that came in, delivered some, like a workshop for the students in the classroom. And then we had the awesome opportunity to come to the studio, to the offices to record there. And that in itself was just a great experience for them to see what a team looks like when they're developing content together, seeing the back end of it, the post-production side, and getting the full exposure. And not only did the students get that full exposure, but Chey and myself, that was the first time for us as well.
I think it was like a aha moment for everyone that was involved. People probably don't realize, so this is back in 2019, we had to get so much special permission, right? Because these kids were going to be recorded.
Yeah.
So we needed to get permission from their parents to be recorded. They had to get on a school bus and come all the way from the west end of Toronto all the way to the east end of Toronto. And I remember when those buses pulled up, like Chaz and I were waiting outside for everybody, and we were like, what the heck are we going to do with all these kids? And, you know, they're looking at up to us, like, you tell us what to do. But we were all kind of flying by the seat of our pants. Like, you know, there was structure, and we had talked about what we were going to do, but you know, the day and the leading up weeks really took a form of its own, so to speak. So it's such a great experience. What I think is so interesting from after that, because we never anticipated it to be necessarily, you know, life-changing. Yeah. But ironically, I feel like for you and your podcasting partner, it really was, because I remember soon after that, it was summer. Yeah. And you guys came and said, you know, we'd love to meet with you and Jazz to talk about podcasting more. And we were like, oh, great. Like, I think we thought more about doing it again for the following year with the students. But we went to, unfortunately, that restaurant no longer exists, Fabrica. And we had some food and some drinks, and you guys were asking us about podcasting more for yourselves. Yeah. And I think you wanted to call it the staff room? Yep. Right? Is that how it started? And I was like, this is genius. Like, I understood why Jazz and I were creating podcasts, because we're small business owners, and we needed that kind of exposure. But the idea of like two teachers getting together to create a podcast. Tell me about like the thought process in your mind at that time on why you wanted to start that.
So it initially began when Chey and I came to the studio to record our little interview with yourself and Jazz, just the four of us, and we did our little...
Like the prequel to the students coming.
Yeah, that's right. Just before the students all came, we did our own little... It was meant to be like a 10-minute conversation that turned into a 45-minute full episode on its own. Yes. Which was fantastic. But Chey and I we valued that conversation because it allowed for dialogue in a very authentic space, but we were at the same time documenting and archiving our thoughts so that we could revisit later, or that others could listen to and say, oh, you know what, I have that same experience, or I felt the same thing, or yeah, you're right, like I never thought of it that way.
So you mean like being on camera felt like you were documenting, or you guys were documenting in some other way?
Well, the recording itself is a documentation.
Okay, got it, yes. Yeah, I never really think about it like that. In all honesty, you're right. Like, Jazz says it, but I never think like, 10 years from now I can look back and see what we discussed and kind of replay my thoughts around that time. So that's so interesting.
Yeah, and it's different than when you read it back in writing. Like, you can write a journal entry, but when you watch yourself say something, you can almost put yourself back in that place at that time and feel the same feelings. And so it was an aha moment for us. We thought, well, this is something that we can do, because teachers have hallway conversations all the time. Yeah. And they talk about things that are going on in their classrooms and going on in the school. We should really be documenting those conversations and talking about them authentically at this time. And, you know, ironically, this happened just before COVID. And we had recorded, you know, a few episodes before everything kind of shut down.
And the episodes that you were recorded were just you and Chey?
Or they were just Chey and myself. So it was just the two of us. We recorded on a Friday afternoon, right after school, in the back of his classroom with the two mics that yourself and Jazz gave us, and which was so nice of you to do. You know, take these mics, get started.
Yeah. So the mics that we gave you were actually the same mics that we used to start our podcast. So those mics, and I just got it back. I'll just grab it from Nikki. You're gonna make an appearance here. These little blue mics, $75. Yeah. This $75 mic is the reason why all of this is really here, and for you guys too. And it's just so I'm gonna put him right in the middle. For sure. Blue. I miss you.
There we go.
Because paying it forward, right? Like, oftentimes people think like there's so much competition, and it's like I want people to listen to my podcast and not your podcast. And there's so much competition, but like there's nothing better than collaboration and to see other people win and succeed. So that's actually one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on, because I've been watching you kind of like silently now. Like, I give you a fist pump and this and that every now and then, but like just what you've done with it. So That's a huge reason, and so thanks to Blue. But anyways,
Yes.
back to you. So you guys started with the 2 mics in the
That's
classroom after school.
After school, and we didn't know what we were doing. All we knew was from what you guys had taught us, and said, okay, use these, these resources and just put it out there. And we were like, okay, let's try this out. So it was August, just before school started, of 2018, I guess.
2019.
No, 2019.
Yeah.
Sorry, 2019. And then it kind of just took off on its own. We put out our posts on Twitter. We weren't really anywhere else other than Twitter, and people kind of saw us and saw we have this new educational podcast. And people listened to our conversations. And
What people were listening at the start?
teachers.
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 Okay, so this wasn't for parents, so to speak. It was for
No,
teachers.
and I think it's still, it's open for anybody to listen to, but our main audience is still teachers.
Okay.
Teachers, those in education, educators,
And all over the
principals.
place. I feel like even
All
right from the
over.
start.
We had a big audience in the U.S. to start, and Canada kind of grew afterwards. So Canada and the
Interesting.
U.S. are still our biggest. That's where our biggest listenership is. We've got some listenership in Australia and the U.K. and
Now all
India,
over.
all over the world. I mean,
But
when
at
you
that
look the
time, I mean,
analytics.
there probably wasn't. I mean, in Canada for sure. Maybe that's why you had such good exposure in the States, because they kind of, started podcasting, so to speak. So people were more into it. Like when we started a podcast here in Canada, no one was really
right.
podcasting.
Yeah.
And something so specific as an educational podcast for teachers. Like I
Yeah.
can't imagine there was that many others in the world when we
Right.
started.
Well, that's what we thought too. And then we
Okay.
started looking. So it was
Okay.
called the Staff Room Podcast.
Yes.
Sort of as a way to talk about the issues that we would talk about while we were sitting in the staff room talking together. We've since changed the name because the staff room isn't always a friendly space for everybody. It can actually get a little toxic
Yes.
in the staff
Yes.
room. And so we thought, we don't want to be promoting that kind of dialogue. So
Like
we changed it.
gossipy
Yeah, the
and-
gossipy,
yes, yes.
talking about kids.
Yeah.
And, that's not what we're about. That's not what the show is about. And so we decided to rebrand to just ourselves as, people were getting to know us. And so, we developed this podcast. People started listening, and it just kind of took off.
Were you surprised?
Yes, very much so. There weren't very many, you're right, educational podcasts in Canada. There
Yeah.
were definitely lots in the U.S. We learned that there was another one called the Staff
Of
Room
course
as well.
there was,
Of course
yes.
there was. And so we sort of developed our niche. We kind of doubled down on the fact that it's just 2 teachers.
Yeah.
Having very authentic, open, non-scripted conversations. We don't plan for these conversations. We sit down on a Friday afternoon once all the kids leave, and we just talk about some of the things that
Some
went on.
experiences.
Yeah.
With obviously, I'm sure you're discreet in terms of which kids you're talking about and not naming
yeah.
names, but all those things, right? Like I'm sure teachers across the world and educators across the world can really say, yeah, I'm having that experience too. And I really want to make an emphasis on the fact that you guys just got started. I have talked to so many people about starting podcasts. People say, Laura, I want to start a show. I really want to do this. And so often they don't do it. A year later I check in and they can't make headway. They can't move past something that's stopping them. And, it usually comes down to some type of insecurity. Mm-hmm. But you guys were one of the few people that took what we said and really ran with it. And maybe it's because you had no expectation of it becoming big.
Yeah.
I think some people want to start a podcast because they want it to be big and they want to, they want that clout. But you guys were just no, even if we only touch the teachers, say, in our school, that would be successful to us. But you named it something that you later found out maybe that wasn't the best name or didn't represent us properly. Then you just changed it. You didn't script anything. You did it in a classroom. It's not like you went to some fancy studio. And it's so funny how it's morphed into this big thing over time, but that's because you got started.
Yes.
And now you guys are experts at this.
Yes. Well, we're still learning. We're still going, through the journey. I wouldn't say that we are experts, but we are definitely on that track. We are definitely more knowledgeable about this than the average teacher who doesn't know anything about it. So that is part of something, like, we won't claim to anybody, well, we're not experts, we're just beginners. Because we have been privileged with the learning, and we have put the work in, and it has been about 5 years now that we've been working at this and building this.
That's so crazy.
And there are different ways to get into podcasting. For Chey and myself, we didn't have any high expectations of becoming a big podcast, but it wasn't really necessarily our goal. Our goal was to just document the stuff that we were doing and archive it. And, 15, 20 years down the road, when we're approaching the end of our career, we want to look back and say, what was teaching like at that time? What were some of the things that we were grappling with?
Yeah, and it's funny because you'll probably see that there's some things that remain the same for all of time, because it's humans, and you're dealing with children and learning and all those things. And then there's going to be some things that change dramatically. So it really will be like a time capsule in a way. I hope I'm not like crossing any boundaries, but maybe you could share with us if there was any type of pushback. Did you get pushback from students, parents, other teachers?
It's interesting. Yes, there's always going to be pushback, because for every revolution there's a counter revolution. There's always someone who's out there to challenge something that you say or do, or even how you do it and your approach. There hasn't been anything that really challenges our philosophy behind teaching, or sort of what we stand for. Because we've always really put ourselves out there as inclusive, open to dialogue, open to learning. Nothing that we say is set in stone. We may be becoming experts on the podcasting itself, but we are definitely not expert educators. That's a journey that we will continue to go through throughout our entire career. And so, we do always mention in the podcast, we're not an expert on this topic. We want to learn from our audience. We want to learn from you. So please reach out to us. Let's have those conversations. We definitely approach any challenge with humility, and say, maybe there's something that we have overlooked in what we said or what we did or how we did it. And so we're always open to that. So the challenges are not necessarily anything that set us back. They actually propel us forward to do, perhaps we haven't done enough research on this topic. There's an angle that we haven't looked at, a perspective that we haven't considered. And so that's on us. That's on us to do that research. And that's something that we really want to put out to students as well.
That's so interesting, because your motto in teaching children, and as adults, as we move further away from being kids, and maybe if you don't have kids, like, you're not thinking about those things all the time, which are like these fundamentals, right? Yeah. Like you're telling the kids like continuous learning and how important that is, and that's a lifelong. And you actually get to now live by it and show the rest of the world that like we can be wrong, or we might have overlooked something, and it's not even right or wrong. Things are not necessarily black and white.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Were there times ever where you thought, because I feel like you guys do discuss current topics that can be charged. And perhaps you've gotten some, I don't want to say backlash, and I don't know if this to be true, so you tell me, some pushback from some people. Did that ever make you feel like, oh, maybe we have to mute ourselves a little bit, or maybe we shouldn't have even done this in the first place? Did you ever kind of feel insecure about what you were doing?
Yes. Myself, I will say 100% yes. That imposter syndrome kicks in fast, and I think more so for a racialized woman than perhaps my counterpart who is a white male. And at those times, we really dialogue with each other. We have those conversations, and we talk about, well, I don't want to do this anymore. No, you can't stop doing this, and we push each other to navigate what to do next and how to do it. And it really helps that we can talk to each other about our own lived experiences and say, I'm feeling this way because, and, Chey will come back and say, well, my experience is this, and I strongly feel like if you can get through this moment, we'll be fine. Like, you can do this, and you should keep doing this, and your voice is important. I think that for myself, and this isn't just in the podcasting space, it's almost in every space. And I don't know if you ever feel that way as a woman and in real estate. That
Imposter
sometimes,
syndrome?
yeah, you don't feel like you belong in the space,
Yes,
and
yes.
people are just trying to shut you up so that your voice isn't heard.
It's funny because in real estate, there are a lot of women. So it's
Yeah.
not like I feel I'm outnumbered. There are certain conversations in business that I suddenly feel insecure about.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because the people in the room are making me feel insecure. I think it's one of those things that, like, just growing up, when people bring your attention to something, right? Like, people say, "Oh, like, you're a woman, so think life is going to be harder." There's like that little thing in your brain that almost starts to look for it,
Yeah.
right? The reticular activator.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, now that, thanks for putting that in my head, because now I'm
Yeah.
going to find the things that prove that to be true.
Yes.
And I don't know if they always are there, or sometimes you just feel that. And I'm sure you've had moments like that where your experience is your perception, right? And it's
Yeah.
coming from your own lens, which is not always true. But, you know, if people put you down enough, I'm not saying I was put down a lot, but like if people kind of put you in a box enough,
Yeah.
maybe is the right terminology, you can start to believe that.
Of course.
And then as we get older, we have to kind of unpack that a little
Yeah.
bit and question ourselves, like, what's true here? What's my own doing versus
Right.
society's doing, or blaming it on somebody else? Like, I put myself in a box sometimes.
Yeah.
Similar, or-
Absolutely. I absolutely do the same thing, and it's very easy to do, I think, in our society. And it doesn't. You don't have to be a woman. You don't have to be somebody who is racialized. Somebody can find some reason to put you in that box, and you have to find your way out of it. I think that there definitely are some things that I overthink. And then I take a step back, but then you really need to be able to navigate that with someone, or with people that you trust, and people that you can go to and say, this is what I'm feeling, I'm experiencing. Do you think that there's any truth to this? And if there is, what can I do to sort of change the experience? And so I've done a lot of that, and yeah, the imposter syndrome has been real a lot, and but it is definitely something that is socially constructed, and so it is something that you can push yourself out of and say, no, you know what, I do belong in this space. My voice and my story deserves to be heard, and it deserves to be heard because of my lived experiences, not because my experience is the same as everybody else's, but this experience needs to be heard as well, because there's plenty of other people that are out there who are probably going through the same thing.
That's so interesting. Just because you feel a way doesn't make it the truth
Right.
either, right? And I think that's so important what you said, is like, I'm sharing my story.
Yeah.
And I think so often, because the way we talk in society, it's like, this is the collective experience.
Yeah.
But what you're really saying is my experience. And
Yeah.
it's not to put words in other people's mouths, but maybe that makes me think I should probably be more thoughtful in the way I say things. Because I say you or
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
when really I just mean myself, right?
Yeah. And people will connect to those things. But and I also feel like when you say my experience, it gives permission for yourself to really speak a little more authentically and openly and truthfully, because no one can really say, well, your experience is wrong. Right? People can say, when you speak collectively, I don't feel the same way as you are explaining. But when you say, this is my experience, it allows people to sort of understand that maybe what you have experienced is different from what they have experienced. Therefore, your perspective is valid.
Right. It still
Even though
matters
it
because
still matters.
it's one data point.
That's right.
And it's not to say that data point is any more or less valid than anyone else. So you guys get into the podcasting thing. You've been doing it for some time.
Yeah.
I feel like this experience for you kind of morphed into all these
did.
things.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about like what you guys are up to and
Sure.
like what it morphed into?
So I'll start with the book. So we wrote a children's book, and
Called?
The Magnificent Microphone.
It all started with Blue.
It did all start with Blue, and Blue has become a big symbol for everything that we have experienced, because if it wasn't for that microphone, we wouldn't be able to share these individualized stories that, perhaps other kids, other people, other adults, other teachers can relate to. And that really was the basis of the book, that my story deserves to be heard, and my lived experiences are what created my story, which might be different from any other student in the class, any other teacher, any other person in the world. But it's still a story that is valid, and it deserves to be put out there for people to consume.
So I guess the idea is like passing the mic, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Like giving everyone an equal opportunity to share their lived experience. How was that received well by the students in your class, or like the teachers? How did you, starting a book is not the easiest thing.
No.
Lots of people want to write a book, but you guys have this book, it's illustrated, there's beautiful pictures. How did you get this up and running?
So it really was when we were teaching students how to podcast, because of course we brought this experience back into the classroom so that we could continue teaching students how to podcast. It's proved to be so valuable for us. We bring it back into the space for students. As teachers, whenever we start something new in the classroom, we love to start it with a story, because it pulls the students in. Find a book, find a story that you can tell the students that allow them to conceptualize the idea and what it looks like in society, in real life, or even in a fantasy world, so that they can connect to it. We had a lot of trouble finding that book to start to talk to students about podcasting, about finding a book about telling your own story, or being, we weren't very hopeful that we were going to find a children's book about podcasting,
right.
But we at least wanted to find something that, that we could tell to students. You have a story, your story needs to be told. And so we wrote that book.
Wow.
And that's what we did. And so we knew of a few publishers, like independent publishers, that were open and taking submissions for manuscripts. So we submitted, and we had somebody come back to us, Codebreaker, and they said, yeah, let's write this book. So we wrote it. A friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, Shauna Perkis, is the illustrator. She's also a teacher. And she helped us with the illustrations, and we got it out there, and it's been really well received by teachers, especially those that want to get into more content creation in their classrooms. Doesn't have to be podcasting. You can tell your story in so many different ways, and also the students that we read the story to, and they find different connections. So the two characters are actually young Chey and young Pav, and I bring my lived experiences into the story. My family is represented, culturally, and Chey is representing his own experiences in the classroom as, a student who is very rambunctious and very high energy, and has a difficult time being absolutely compliant the way that students are expected to be. However, he still has a valid story. He is still very smart. He still has something to say that people don't often give a lot of attention to because of his personality, his characteristics. And so they're both characters have these aspects about them that many students can relate to, and that's what we wanted to put out there. These two children have very, very different lives, very different lived experiences, but can still tell their story, which is obviously going to be very different from each other, but equally valid and equally valuable.
Right. The overall human experience.
Yeah.
Where can people find this book? Is this for sale in any bookstore? Or
it can
online?
be found at Another Story Bookshop in Toronto, A Different Book List. Those are two independent retailers. It can also be found at Chapters Indigo online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble in the US, and in a bunch of different outlets.
Wow. I keep saying wow because under my breath as you're talking, because I just can't even believe that one little conversation that we had, what you guys have done with this, to write a book and for it to be successful, and now for the school system also, because when you think about the school system, it's traditional, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who want change. I think most people get into education to make valuable change, but then you also get over years and years and years, sometimes your dreams of making these big changes
Yeah.
fizzle out because you realize it's not easy, and every turn you take there's your bureaucracy shutting you down, so to speak. And so I feel like getting something like that and saying like, no, we're going to teach podcasting and storytelling in the classroom.
Yeah.
I imagine that wasn't like just overnight. Everyone was like, yeah, go do that. I would assume some people were like, no, that's not part of the curriculum, and we don't want to do that.
Well, the good thing about podcasting is it's so easily tied into the curriculum.
Oh.
I mean, yes, we are sitting here and we're talking to each other, but there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into it. Maybe not for each individual episode as you become much more seasoned at it, but in the beginning, I was scripting every word. That's writing. And we're speaking to one another, that's oral communication. Mm-hmm. We're having a conversation, we're learning how to dialogue. I'm responding to the things that you are saying in a meaningful way. That's the language arts curriculum. And media literacy. We're taking everything, we're doing the post-production on it, we're creating graphics, we're putting those graphics on social media, which is again, media literacy. That was actually the easy part.
Okay.
It was selling people on the equipment that you might need. Chey and I started with these microphones. Yeah. Some people start with, some people need that push of that if you build it, they will come. Like, let's build the studio. And then it makes it easy to sell the students into wanting to try this.
Right, because you make it look sexy, so to speak. Like, it's like, come on in, we have a legitimate space.
Right.
And I think that's where some of the imposter syndrome does come from, right? Like, unless you have something that looks legit, you kind of feel like no one's going to pay attention, no one's going to watch. But I actually find some of the best stories I have are from the moments that it was grimy and it was not sexy and it was ugly, and you have things that only cost $75 and versus like a whole set now. Like those moments, and I'm sure for you too, when you look back, you're like, oh man, it was just the two of us in the back of the classroom at 4:00, before it becomes something so big. They're the best stories to tell.
And we tell that story. Like, we tell the students that these were our beginnings. It doesn't have to be everybody's beginning, but sometimes people need a little bit of a buy-in, right? They need that little push to be like, yeah, like you said, like this is pretty sexy, this is cool. Chey and I had the ability and the opportunity to do all of that research, to find, the best equipment that we could bring at a reasonable price point so that schools can invest in this.
Do you go and teach other schools about this?
We do.
As well? Okay.
Yeah, so we go into different boards or different schools. We actually went into about 10 to 12 schools in the board that we work for to bring this to their schools. And then other boards as well. We go in and we teach them about the entire process, like even how to get started, what to do, how to write that script, where to find your music, your jingles, how to create an advertisement within your episodes.
Like how to upload it, where to upload it,
exactly.
All those things, right?
All those little things where teachers feel like that I don't know where to start.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. I'd rather not do it because I'm comfy over here.
Because it's too much. That's right. Yeah.
But when you go to show them how actually easy it is to do with a little bit of research, and you're providing most of the work done, that's so incredible to be a pioneer in that space. I think is really fantastic.
Yeah.
So much so that I know you've just recently won an award. I don't know if it was for that, but
so
tell us about that.
It was the an excellence award for driving innovation, and it was very much for bringing this medium into the classroom and using it to propel those student stories within those classroom spaces. And so Chey and I have actually we've both won that award. We've both been recognized for this work. So in the board, in all school boards actually in Ontario and Canada, there are heritage months to represent different heritages that are represented in the school system, in the classroom. And I am a Sikh woman, and so we did for Sikh Heritage Month. I led a little team that produced a Sikh Heritage Month podcast that was then put out into the system and publicly can be listened to as well. It was 3 episodes, but it was all student led and it was all student developed. They led interviews with different people, teachers, educators, principals, about different topics about Sikhism, and it was really well received, and I think that was something very innovative and something that the board hadn't seen done before, and I think that was one of those major things that sort of led to the award.
Oh, as the light falls down, see, it's just a podcast studio. Things happen. We roll with it no matter what. Did that feel like a full circle moment to you?
It totally did. At that moment, it really felt like, you know what, people are kind of seeing the work that I've put into this and what I have done, and maybe I do deserve to keep doing it, and maybe I should keep doing it because it is being seen. I did actually really feel validated. Did I need it to keep going? Probably not. But it really did feel good to be acknowledged. As I'm sure everybody feels good, you're not doing it for that reason.
Yeah, but when you get it, it does solidify why you were maybe doing it in the first place,
exactly.
Right? Especially when you have those moments of doubt. I'm curious, in this whole experience, the book, getting the award, talking to the schools, talking to the kids, is there a story that kind of stands out to you where you feel like, this is why I do it? Like, is there something that happened with any of the students that you could share with us, or any of the teachers, like an aha moment that other people picked up on that you kind of said, you know, I'm so proud that I got to be a part of that?
There are so many little stories. There's stories about when Chey and I started that, you know, I think that when it came to building those connections with people from the other side of the world, especially during like COVID. We did a live radio show in the early beginnings as well. We don't do it so much anymore. It is very time consuming and difficult to do. But during COVID, it was a real authentic and meaningful way to connect with people live. And, you know, we would take calls from people, and we would get calls from the U.S., from like Texas and, you know, California, and people were calling in.
How did you get that?
So there's an educational
spot on the radio.
There's an online radio station called Voice Ed Radio, and it's an educational radio space. And Stephen Hurley runs this. It's a one-man show, but he's got all kinds of live programming that goes out on this app, this radio station. And he reached out to us, and he actually wanted to put our podcast on his network. And then we discovered that he does live shows, and we were like, so what do we do to get a live show? And he was like, you want some airspace? You got it. So
you didn't feel imposter syndrome then?
100%.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, like, now I'm a radio show host.
I hated every moment of it. I was we are live, and I am sweating, and it was a mess, but it was like a really cool experience. And because it's live radio, and he has a license to play music, we were able to play music. So we would take requests, and we would just play music and off of like Apple Music and Spotify, and broadcast it. And it was a really cool experience. COVID happens. We decided to continue with the show, and we moved it to like Friday mornings. And people would tune in from all over the place.
It was called The Drive?
It was called The Drive.
Okay.
Yeah, it was called The Drive because when we first started it, we would do the show as a 30-minute live show from 8 o'clock to 8:30 in the morning while people were still driving into work. It was still education-based, but we played some music. We picked a theme, and we would make a playlist with that theme.
And you shot this from the school?
That was from the school.
Wow.
So we would get to school at 8 o'clock, just before 8 o'clock in the morning. We would do our live radio show before school started. And then COVID happened. We kept it in the mornings on Friday mornings, and it became like during that shutdown period where nothing was really happening, it became like a 3-hour radio show on Friday mornings. People just wanted it to keep going and going. Like, can you just be on air all day long? Because we talked about the things that were happening in schools at the time, like with the shutdown and with COVID. And, you know, teachers would call in, educators would call in from like different parts of the world saying, you know.
No one knew what the heck was going on, and no one knew how to teach on Zoom.
That's right. And it was such a global experience. We had people calling in from the Middle East, from Kuwait. and telling us that what they're experiencing in education at the time. And you know, we would have really deep, meaningful conversations, and people were calling us like in tears.
Oh.
And we were talking about all of the things that we were experiencing, and it was just a very collective, I'm even getting chills thinking about it now. It was just such a collective experience for everyone. And I think it was at that moment that I realized that how you are actually reaching people. Like, these people are not just casually listening to your episode. There are some people who are subscribed and they listen to every episode when it comes out, because
they were looking to you really to like help them through
Yeah.
what many people I think was one of the hardest times of our lives.
That's right.
Like, you know, people go through different hardships, but like, you're right, the collective experience that everyone was going through. And, you know, so many parents, I think, probably felt like, thank God for teachers, because now they were the ones at home trying to keep their kids in line, doing their work, also understanding like what their kids were learning. And I'm sure you, like, just parents were like tuning in, like, I don't know what I'm doing now, and now I'm the one that has to be teaching, and I can see firsthand what it's like to spend like all day with kids and to try to get them to do their math.
Exactly. I mean, there's that experience, and then don't forget how invested teachers get with their students. And this was March, and these are students that they've had since the beginning of the year, and all of a sudden, I don't know if they're okay. Like, I don't have access to the students like I did every day when I was going in to see them. They're not showing up to class. I'm calling home, or they're on screen and there's like 4 other kids that are on their computers trying to do something, and there's you can see frustrated parents in the background who can't
and I'm
go
sure
to work.
You had some kids that you also knew, I don't know if they should be home. Like, at least you were the reprieve for some kids, right?
Absolutely. And it got heavy. It got really heavy, hearing stories from teachers about things that are happening within their spaces, talking about our own experiences and how we're kind of going through this, talking about how we sent students home that day in March when we didn't know if we were going to be coming back. With all of our art supplies and whatever school supplies you want, take them home with you, because I don't know when we're going to be back. Taking books home from my classroom library, just take whatever you want so that you have something to do at home. Because this might be 2 weeks, or it might be, you know, as we saw, it was the end of the year.
Yeah.
And it was difficult for us as teachers to go through that experience, but to now have other teachers that you can talk to about it. I think that connection was really, really, like, it hit me.
How big this was and how important what you were doing was.
Yeah.
Right? To reach it on a global level. My goodness. I don't even know where to take it from there, because I was just so listening to your story, and I'm just in awe. I think what you guys have done is so profound, so unique, and I want the viewers and listeners to understand that, like, sometimes people say, well, I don't even know what I would start a podcast about. And it's like, just what are you up to? You know, it's not like anyone was funding you guys at the start. It's not like you got the A-OK to start. You just kind of did it.
Yeah.
And you did it on a budget, which I think was smart. And you said, like, let's see where we can take this. And I think that sense of curiosity that we so want children to have, right? A sense of curiosity of, what can I accomplish? What what am I capable of? You guys definitely did that. And now it's morphed into all these things. And it's just so incredible from the outside looking in to see what you guys have done. Like, I feel proud in a way. I'm like, I know them. And at the same time, just really happy that you guys have taken this on, as well as envious that I didn't have teachers like you.
Oh, well, that's very kind.
I had good teachers, but like some good, some average, but not all teachers are made the same.
Yeah, and you know, I have to say that if I was by myself doing this, I probably wouldn't have gotten that kickstart. I think that it was important for Chey and I to have each other in getting started. That was definitely something, like, I needed that push, and he needed the doer. Like, he needed someone to actually do the things that needed to be done.
So was he more like the ideas kind of guy? And you're like, I'll actually get it done?
He still
that
is.
Reminds me of a relationship that I have with somebody.
Yes,
I know that
he's
very well.
He's the creative, And I will take all of the ideas that he's got and kind of help him put them together. And then we created this thing. And I think that having that teaching partner or a partner that can really, like, you can throw those ideas at each other and you can build something out of it. I think that was really critical for us.
That's such a good point, because I think so often people are fearful of being on the camera or like speaking into a mic. But having that other person that you can lean on, I so often tell people, bring on guests like I'm doing, so that you don't have to do all the heavy lifting for 40 minutes. Like, just have a conversation. But even better to that would be to have a partner. And the partner doesn't have to necessarily be a co-host.
Right.
A partner, like when we started, I was behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I wasn't in front of the camera, but I was just as committed to getting that podcast up and running, right? Like, so I YouTubed how to start a podcast, and I figured out how to distribute it, and I figured out how to get music on the front of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't my face on it, but to have a partner or someone who's just as committed to getting something done as you are. And then it's ironic, because then when you're doing it long enough, I was like, well, wait a second.
Yeah.
I want to be on there too.
I want to be on there too.
So, it's kind of funny how things evolve. And I think the future is obviously very bright for you. Are you guys up to anything new that you want to share? I don't know if you can, or if there is. I don't know.
We're always up to something new. I think that's something that's really good about us, is neither of us can really sit still for too long. Like, we always want to get into something new. We're still going into schools to help schools set up their own podcast studios. We're still working with students. We're back in the classroom this year. It's starting in September, and I'll be teaching grade 6. Chey will be teaching grade 8, both at the same school, which is really nice. We're still doing all of that, and we're still writing. We have a teacher resource book that will be coming out. It's in the final stages of editing, and we're looking forward to putting that out. It's called Teachers Talking Teaching, Amplifying Our Practice. And it's essentially just kind of like a written version of our podcast. So
Another way to communicate.
Another way to communicate. Another way to sort of talk about some of the things that we discuss on our podcast with a little more of our personal insights. So we've taken some of our most talked about, most discussed episodes, and we've turned them into chapters, and we infuse them with many personal teaching anecdotes, and to really bring that to life, we speak to an expert in that area, and we add the transcript of our oral conversation right into the chapters, so that you can sort of get that podcasting sense, but in written form.
Right.
So it's another way to sort of encapsulate much of the work that we have done around podcasting. Yeah,
that's
so that'll
so
be
fantastic.
out soon. We definitely want to write another children's book and continue that story, so that might happen sometime soon. And a book about podcasting we're working on right now as well, about podcasting in the education space. It's just another way to get started.
So it's not really summer for you, needless to say.
It never is, Laura.
You're still very, very busy. I know you talked about the partnership, but maybe one last either tip, piece of advice to people who are thinking about podcasting, or thinking about writing a book, or perhaps something that I didn't touch on today that you kind of felt, I hope she asks me this, and I didn't. Anything that you kind of want to leave our viewers and listeners with, as I'm going to put you on the spot.
We've had a great conversation, and I'm always so grateful to connect with you. As you viewers might know by now, it was because of yourself and Jazz that we got started. And I think that what you provided for us was a lot of inspiration. And if there's one thing that I will put out there is, when it comes to doing stuff like this, don't make yourself do it. Like, something that Chey always says is inspire, don't require. Like, don't put that pressure on yourself, but find that inspiration that is going to propel you forward. So don't say, I have to start a podcast. Maybe that podcast isn't that way for you to create that content yet. But if you've got that inspiration, then roll with the inspiration and find something that you can create with using that inspiration. It might just be a blog. It might be like just quick TikTok videos.
Telling stories through pictures.
That's right.
Yeah.
Drawing pictures, writing poetry. There's so many ways to create content and to put your vision and all the things that you've got going on in your head, your story, out into the world. And so just roll with that idea and don't force it, because I think that the more authentic this work is, the more it touches people and reaches people.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for you guys, I'm going to leave you with one last quote that Pav already said, which is inspire, don't require. And we'll see you next time.